What's up everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be the best books of 2019 and I'm really sorry that this is just kind of like getting out there late. I just didn't want to film all of these videos in December when I was still reading because I wanted my like stats and stuff to be exactly the way that they are. And so I'm sorry if you've been waiting a really long time for these videos, but let's go ahead. I have 10 books to talk about, which it was so hard for me to like fit these into 10. Like I wanted to do like 16 or 18, but I thought that that would be just way too long of a video. And you know, I really wanted to focus on the ones that I loved the most, but I just, it was really, really hard, you guys. The funniest thing is that in 2019, I actually had found a new author that quickly became my all-time favorite author, and that was Taylor Jenkins Reid. And so I am so surprised. I literally have 3 books on this list. Like 3 out of 10 of my favorite reads are gonna be her books, which is just so amazing. So let's just go ahead and get right into the video. I don't think I put these in like exact order of how I loved them. They're all kind of equally loved since I had to fit them in this 10 favorites. And so don't like think that if I'm saying number 1, like that was my all-time favorite. These are all of my all-time favorites of 2019. So number 1, we're starting out with No Exit, and I loved this book. This is one of my all-time favorite thrillers. It's just absolutely amazing and thrilling. It is one of the best done thrillers in my opinion. This book was about this, I think, college student that was driving home through Colorado and there was a blizzard. She got stuck. She had to stop at a rest stop where there were like 5 or 6 other strangers there that also got snowed in. And so the snowplows weren't coming, like they had to just stay at this rest stop. And she was looking around for like cell service and stuff because she couldn't get cell service. And she walks behind like one of the vans that's parked at the rest stop. And there is a little girl that is in a cage in the back of this van. Crazy, I know. So what happens then is that she realizes that she is with a child abductor at this rest stop, and there's only like 5 or 6 other people, so it has to be one of them. So it's so super thrilling. I absolutely loved it. I remember having to reread like the ending twice, I think, because I thought something else happened, but something actually else happened, because like I was gonna be so mad at the book if they ended it that way. So if you've read it, you know I just loved this book so much. It is such a great thriller, and it wasn't like too atmospheric, but it also was, you know, within a snowstorm or blizzard. So it's like the perfect book to read right now in the wintertime during a snowstorm. Okay, the next book on my list is Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, and I think this is my first like actual romance slash smutty book that I even like read. I read this book because a lot of my friends in my book club told me that like this book was absolutely amazing and I had to read it. And I am so glad that they made me read it because it has become one of my all-time favorite romances. It also has one of my all-time favorite characters in it, like my book husband, because let's be real, he'd be my husband. Pike Lawson is the best. So what I love about this book is it is a taboo like age gap romance, and so the girl is like 18 or 19, I believe, and then the guy is 38. And it's also taboo because it's her current boyfriend's father who she is having like fantasies about. And I loved it because it wasn't just all smut. It wasn't just all just that like very vulgar-ish type of writing. It was not like that. You ended up really falling in love with Pike, and I felt like I was really just cheering like Pike and Jordan, who is the girl. I feel like I was cheering on, like I was totally shipping their relationship, and it was just, I just loved it so much. It was so entertaining. And if you are kind of in the middle where you don't really like the whole like smutty type of books but you still love romance, I really think that you should try this one out because yes, it did have some sex scenes in it, but it was definitely one of the best well done romances I have read in, I don't even know, since I've been reading. Okay, now we're gonna move on to my favorite author of 2019. The next 3 books are by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and the first one I'm gonna talk about is One True Loves, because this was actually the first book that I read by her, and so I really loved this book. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid because, or at least her contemporary romance is my favorite, because it's so emotional, and I love that. I love emotional romances. That's something I feel like I learned about myself in 2019, is that I do love the romance genre, but I am very particular with the books that I deem favorites in the romance genre. Most of the time they have to be like hard-hitting, emotional, really, you know, dig deep into relationships, and those are the kinds that I love the most. So One True Loves is a crazy story about this lady had gotten married, and I think it was coming up on their 1-year anniversary, and her husband ends up getting in like an airplane crash like over some islands, and she doesn't hear from him like until years later. And that's not a spoiler, it actually says that in the synopsis. So she ends up grieving. She meets a new guy years later. I think it's like 4 years later maybe. So she meets a new guy, falls in love with him, and as soon as I think she gets engaged to him, but as soon as she's like, you know, oh, this is the guy for me, her actual husband is found like on these islands or is rescued or something like that. Then she has to pick between the two, because obviously he is alive, but then she also fell in love with this other guy. And like, can you guys even imagine, like, could you imagine, number one, it's not like you on purpose fell out of love from your actual husband, but like, if you think that he's dead, you grieved for so long, you moved on, but like, it was such an emotional read, and I didn't know which guy I was voting for. Like, you are attached to both sides because like no one did anything wrong in the story. No one was at fault. It was a complete accident. Loved this book so much. You have to read it. My battery's dying. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is After I Do, and this is by Taylor Jenkins Reid as well. This actually, yeah, I think this is the second one that I read. I think I wrote these down in order of how I read them. So I read After I Do, and this one is an emotional read as well, but this one I love so much because it is about a married couple that is really just struggling. It's not like a big event happened that made them struggle with their marriage. It was like over the time of years. I don't remember exactly how many years they had been married, but I don't know, let's just say like 8 years. They finally realized that like they didn't spend a lot of time with each other. They kind of like really didn't act like they loved each other anymore. Like they loved each other, but you know, it's almost like a roommate situation. And they decide to spend 1 year, instead of getting like divorced, they decide to spend 1 year separated without talking to each other. You're not allowed to contact the other person, and just see if that's like actually what they want to do, if they want to get divorced eventually. So they try this like 1 year separation, no contact type of thing. Oh my gosh, if you want to like cry your eyes out, then you need to read this book. It was written so beautifully. Like, even though I feel confident in my marriage most times, but even though like I don't feel like I have a lot of the marriage problems that they were talking about in the book, I could see like the way that it was written. I feel like I could just see that happening in the future if you're not careful, or if you just kind of go on a day-to-day basis and you don't do like date nights and you don't actually, you know, make a point to like talk and communicate. And so that was what was heartbreaking, is that I could see this actually happening, and I just felt for the characters so much. Like, I loved this book. I feel like this is one that I would definitely reread in the future, or at least listen to. I think I actually listened to this one mostly through audiobook, and it was just still amazing. And I'm not even a big audiobook fan, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Like, I think that people that are married would appreciate this story more so than if you are single. Not saying that you shouldn't read this or that you're not going to get it, but I do think that it hits closer to your heart if you've dealt with in a relationship like this. And so I loved this book so much. It is a great one. Okay, the last Taylor Jenkins Reid book that's on this list is Maybe in Another Life. And this one I really liked because it had this like time travel alternate reality thing, and I love that. If you didn't know, like, some of my favorite books are about time travel and alternate realities, and there's another one on this list that's like that. And I think last year on my 2018 list I had Dark Matter, which also has that in, so you know I'm gonna like the book if it has that in it. But this one was very similar to One True Loves, with the fact that there were 2 different guys, no one did anything wrong, and it's really hard to decide like who you are voting for or cheering on as far as like boyfriends, significant others go. This one is about this lady, I don't remember her name, but I know that she loves cinnamon buns, and she has this like moment in her life where it splits into 2. So one of her alternate realities is going down this one path. It's like from this one decision. So I think it's like whether or not she's going home with this one guy. So in one version of her life, she goes home with that guy, and you read about her whole life, or most of her life, like from that actual decision, and then she decides not to go home with the guy, and it splits off into a different life, and how her life is different. And it's so crazy. Both versions of her life, good and bad things happen. So there's not even a version of her life that you are voting for more. And it really makes you think about your own life. Like, sure, you can like look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad I made that decision because I love where I am now. But at the same time, this book is really pointing out that even if you didn't make that decision and you're not where you are now, there could be somewhere else that you also were content with, if that makes any sense. And so I really loved this book because of that. I just really loved how thought-provoking it was. Yeah, one of my favorites, of course. Okay, the next book on this list is actually not even published yet, but I did read it in 2019, so I wanted to include it because it is one of my favorite books that I read in 2019, but this book won't be published until, I think it's March 3rd or 17th, but I'll pop it up for you. It is Darling Rose Gold, and I really enjoyed this book because it is very close to the whole Gypsy Rose story, which is about like the Munchausen by proxy syndrome. I think that's how it's said. I still didn't look it up to see if I was saying it correctly. This book was amazing because I just felt like the story was so different compared to a lot of thriller stories. You know, I feel like so many thrillers can be so similar with like the cheating husband and wife or the dead body or like all the lies and stuff. But this one was about this mother who lied to her daughter her whole life, making her think that she was sick, like feeding tube, had cancer, bald head, like all of that type of stuff. And she ended up being not sick at all. So this book is about like the actual revenge story and her mom getting out of jail and coming to live with the daughter again. And it's told from both perspectives, and you get to like actually read about the past and like how she was like the daughter was treated in the past and how the mom thought in the past. It is crazy nuts. I have actually not seen anybody else rate it like below 5 stars yet. Everyone seems to be loving it. It's a very fast and quick read, and I just loved the idea of it all. Like, I didn't know that this was a thing, and so when I ended up reading it, I became obsessed with like the Gypsy Rose story, and I went and watched The Act on Hulu, and I loved that one. This book was amazing. I thought the twists at the end were just fantastic, and I really think that a lot of thriller lovers are going to love this one in 2020. Okay, the next book on this list is The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain, and this is the very first Diane Chamberlain book I have ever read, and I read it by complete accident pretty much. So I was doing Bookopoly back in like July and August, and in my Bookopoly game, it's actually something that I play with the book club, and I'll be doing it again this year, so we'll make a whole video about it again if you're interested in knowing what it is, but I'm not going to talk about that now. I have like little chest cards, but in order to like have books for your chest cards, you have to put like somebody else's favorites in this chest, the community chest. And so I had picked like a bunch of other members' favorite books that I like had on my list to read, but then I had to pick like 10. So I didn't really know much about The Dream Daughter and ended up putting it in that pile. And of course, it was the first one I picked. I was really upset actually. I was like, I'm just gonna DNF this book. Like, I don't like historical fiction. This is gonna be like the worst book ever. And I ended up picking Diane Chamberlain's The Dream Daughter, which I have never read anything by Diane Chamberlain. So this is gonna be my very first book, and I am really scared actually because it said something about like being in like 1970 and stuff, and I really do not like historical fiction, but everyone's telling me that I should at least try to read it, so I'm gonna go ahead and try it out. And it's a 5-star read. It is on my top best books of 2019. Naive Jackie. So I ended up loving this book because it's not exactly historical fiction. This book is about, I think it actually starts back in like the 1960s, like the storyline, but a lot of it, because it has like time travel in it, a lot of it has to do with like 2001 and like 2003 and stuff. So you're like going just back and forth so much that like being in the 1960s didn't really bother me. This is such an emotional read. read, and it reminds me just so much of Dark Matter because of the whole like time travel alternate reality thing, but then it also like packed an amazing punch emotionally, and it kind of reminded me of All Your Perfects because it actually has like birthing a baby and just like the loss of a baby in it as well. The story is about this young mother who is pregnant at the moment, but the doctor in 1960 isn't able to deliver like her healthy baby because there's like a heart defect or something. So the baby's like growing healthy, but I guess there's this heart defect that they detected, and so the chances of her having like a live pregnancy or a healthy like live birth slim to none. And so she ends up like being able to time travel. I know it sounds weird, but it's like not weird in the book, but she ends up time traveling to like 2001 or something when they actually have the correct procedures to like fix the heart defect and undergo surgery, and she ends up like doing that, but then like other complications arise, and like 2001 is like when obviously the World Trade Centers fell, and like oh my gosh, there is just so much happening in this book, and I just couldn't, like the story is so emotional and strong, and it was amazing. I loved it. It is just like, I really want everyone to read it because I feel like it's very underrated and it's a great book. Okay, the next one, number 8 that I have on this list, is Never Have I Ever by Jocelyn Jackson, and I also read this one by accident. It actually, I won a giveaway on Instagram and got sent this book, and the cover was just so absolutely beautiful. Like, how often do you actually see purple books like this? And so I ended up taking it with me to my beach trip where I read so many books this year, and I think it was one of the first ones that I started when I was there, and I loved it. It reminded me a lot of Big Little Lies because it has a lot of like drama and gossip and like blackmailing and stuff, and I love a good thriller book with blackmailing. And so this book is about this, it's like a book club with like women, obviously like grown women. They're in this like fancy neighborhood or whatever. They all go down into like this lady's basement every single, I don't know, once a week, and like talk about book club and get drunk on wine and stuff. Sounds like my kind of night. Well, anyway, this new neighbor comes over and starts playing this Never Have I Ever game with everybody, and it turns out that she is kind of like knowing secrets about like our main character, and then it turns into this whole blackmailing fiasco. And like, I know it doesn't sound super thrilling with the synopsis, but it's a great read. I loved it. If you love like domestic thrillers that are kind of like Big Little Lies or are based off of the whole lying and framing and blackmailing, then I think you would really like this one. Okay, next up, number 9 is I Can Be a Better You by Taryn Fisher. This was my first thriller novel by Taryn Fisher. She actually only has 2 thrillers out right now, and I do love her thriller writing. Not a huge fan of Taryn Fisher's like romance books because they're too like lyrical for me, but her thrillers are actually pretty good. So I loved this book. I read it back for a Buzzwordathon by Books and Lala in the summer. You can also find this book probably by the name of Bad Mommy. So it could be I Can Be a Better You or Bad Mommy. They changed the title. I don't know when, but they changed it just in case you needed to know that. This book is told by 3 perspectives, but it's in like 3 different parts. So it's not like you're reading from all 3 perspectives at once. It's broken up into 3 different parts, and I really, really loved that and appreciated it. I feel like it made the thriller just go by so quickly. It was really easy to just jump into. This is about this lady who lost her child from a miscarriage, but she thinks this other lady's child is her, like has the soul of her dead child, and so it's really creepy that way. She ends up like stalking them and like buying the house next door, and tries to become like great friends with this other lady and her husband and that child. So you get to read then from the perspective of the crazy lady, then the mom, and then I think the husband, or those might be flip-flopped. It's a really good story because you don't know who to trust. Like, you don't know if everyone's an unreliable narrator or if no one's an unreliable narrator. It's really, really good, and I highly recommend it. It was one of the best like twisty turny thrillers that I had read this year, and so yeah, I think a lot of people would like it. Plus Taryn Fisher has that like dark brooding side of her, and so you find that coming out in the book, and I really like that. Last but not least, number 10 is going to be Too Late by Colleen Hoover. Like, I could not end 2019 without having a Colleen Hoover book on my favorites list. Rewriting It was really close, but it just didn't quite get there. But Too Late was a great perfect read. I actually had heard about this book from a lot of other people because she didn't technically publish it right away. Like, she just wrote it for fun a couple years ago, I think. And it's a like really dark thriller romance. So there are a lot of trigger warnings in it, and that might be why it doesn't have a lot of huge ratings, but I am not usually scared away from trigger warnings. And so I ended up picking this book up, and I was expecting it to not be good because everyone was just like, whatever, it's whatever. I loved this book. I feel like this one was way better than Verity, which is actually her thriller romance. I was not a huge fan of Verity, and this one was like the perfect amount of thriller and twists and romance and a couple sex scenes, and I thought it was absolutely amazing. The synopsis is very vague, so I'm not really gonna tell you much about what it's about because I really don't want to give anything away. But if you love that like thriller romance mix, and if you're a big fan of Colleen Hoover, and if you like crazy books, like if you don't care a lot about the trigger warnings, then I think that you would really enjoy this book. But definitely be careful going into it because it's definitely not going to be for everyone just because of all those trigger warnings. Make sure you do your research so you don't come after me later. But I really enjoyed this book, and I wish that more people would read it. Okay, that's it. We did it. We got through the 10 best books of 2019. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite books of 2019 were, and if you had any of these on your list. Would love to hear from you guys, but I will see you very soon in another video. Bye everyone.